Hello again. I want briefly to explore a theme which I've pursued here before, and that is the reason why almost everything in the world has been invented by people whose ancestors are from Europe. Why is it that in the last 500 years alone, we have seen telescopes and microscopes, chronometers, steam engines, railway trains, sewing machines, mains electricity, electric lights, electric motors, telephones, radios, bicycles, pneumatic cars, motor cars, diesel engines, aeroplanes, cameras, television, radar, computers, and spaceships, all being invented by white men and hardly anything by any other race? Would anybody like to cite a few things invented in the last 500 years that have revolutionized the world in the way those um, things that I've just cited have? Things that is to say that were not invented by white men of European ancestry. One explanation which has been advanced is, of course, that the early people in Europe had to cope with the harsh conditions of the Ice Age, and that this stimulated their ingenuity and caused them to invent ways to stay warm and survive. On the face of it, this sounds plausible, but it's almost certainly not the correct explanation. The Eskimos have also had to adapt to icy conditions, but this did not cause them to invent aeroplanes or mobile telephones. Other races have also had to survive with adverse conditions such as drought and find ways to survive. The Khoisan people of southern Africa, for instance, they certainly found ways to get by and survive in the Kalahari Desert, but the list of Khoisan inventions is a short one. The most obvious explanation is that the white race benefited from a unique combination of certain traits which modern humans acquired from the Neanderthals. People in other parts of the world, in Asia, also acquired Neanderthal genes, of course, mingled with those of the Denisovans, but it seems that Europe had just the right proportion of the particularly useful genes. In parts of East Africa, places such as Eritrea, for example, there are small traces of Neanderthal DNA brought there by the colonization of the Sabians from what is now Yemen. The levels are far lower than in the average European, though. One particular gene which 70% of Europeans have is a variation of microcephalin, which protects against a disorder of microcephaly and is connected with the growth and architecture of the brain. Babies with microcephaly are born with heads much smaller than average. Another gene which helps the brain develop is a variation of the ASPM gene. This is found in just a quarter of the world's population, mainly in Europe. In 2005, a researcher at the University of Chicago called Bruce Lunn found that these two variants of the genes had only been around in our own species for 40,000 years and 6,000 years, respectively. A paper published that year claimed that this was evidence of the continued evolution of humans, as it was asserted that the genes had spread so quickly that they must confer some positive advantage to those inheriting them. It soon turned into a raging controversy, of course, with those connected with the research or indeed writing about it being accused of racism, of course. The problem was that both these genes were far more common in those of European ancestry than they were in people whose origin was sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world, for example, South America. The question was raised as to whether it might be possible that these genes had some effect on culture and civilization. The variant of microcephalin appeared to have become established soon after modern humans colonized Europe, and the other gene, the variant of ASPM, could be traced back to the time of the first cities in the Middle East. It was speculated that these genes had caused a flowering of human intellect, and that by implication those who remained in Africa had not benefited from this boost to their brain power. I give a couple of references for those interested in this subject. Of course, not all Europeans have these genes, any more than all Europeans invent telescopes or electric lights. They are wholly absent from certain other populations. The likelihood is that those with white European ancestry are more likely to be endowed with high intellect than those whose heritage lies in, say, sub-Saharan Africa. This is the neatest and most economical explanation for what is observed, and would explain why telephones were not invented by the indigenous inhabitants of Australia, nor mains electricity first devised by those living in the Amazonian rainforest.